Thank you for joining me, Scott. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. There's so much going on right now in Ukraine and in the Donbass, especially with the referendums that are going on. But I think my question is for you. I'm not a military analyst, so I would like to know how you think this is going to affect the Russian approach to the war. I mean, up till now, it's been a special military operation, in their words. How is this going to change that? Do you think it's going to change that, or?
Well, it fundamentally changes it. On February 24th, President Putin announced the initiation of a special military operation. It wasn't war. The way he articulated it was, this was collective, preemptive self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, namely that the newly declared independent republics of Donetsk and Lugansk had created a collective security arrangement with Russia.
Right.
And that within that security arrangement, there was a threat being posed by Ukraine to Lugansk and Donetsk, but now because they are in a collective security framework, Russia was able to launch a preemptive attack to eliminate an imminent threat posed by some 60,000 odd NATO-trained Ukrainian troops that were preparing to attack the Donbass. And people tend to forget that that's the legal framework.
In fact, they've been told it's unprovoked over and over. That's the propaganda that they're hearing every day.
Right. Well, I mean, we're not even getting into Minsk. What President Poroshenko talked about. Minsk was just a sham designed to buy time for NATO to build the Ukrainian army that was now threatening Donbass. They also don't talk about the fact that NATO had already poured in hundreds of millions of dollars of, they call it defensive weaponry, but the bottom line is it empowered Ukraine to serve as a de facto proxy of NATO. And so, Russia's concerns about having NATO come right up to its borders were being played out, even though Ukraine wasn't a full member of NATO. It functioned as a proxy, NATO proxy. But the important thing about the legalities of the special military operation is they are singularly focused on the Donbass. Russia doesn't have, it's not war, so the notion that Russia can, behave against Ukraine as if it were at war is an absurdity. From a legal perspective, Russia is unable to mobilize the totality of its military force. Russia is compelled to limit itself to that to the military force that can be brought to bear based upon peacetime manpower constraints. And so, we're looking at 150 to 200,000 Russian troops, in addition to the militias that fought for Donetsk and Lugansk. Later on, those militias were enhanced with, volunteer units, members of the National Guard, Russian National Guard, Wagner, and others. But, by and large, the Russians were limited to the troops they had at their disposal. When you fight a war or a conflict, you have to secure your borders and you have to secure your strategic depth. It's not as though Russia put 200,000 troops online and said forward march. These troops were spread out on a very wide frontage.
Very long.
And, one of the tasks of phase one, I believe, the Russians have been very reticent. We don't know what exactly the Russian military strategy is because they just aren't talking about it. They basically do and not talk. So you're left looking at the arrows on the maps, trying to divine meaning into it. But we have a hint on March 25th when the Russians declared an end to phase one of the special military operation and began phase two. The hint was that phase one was about shaping the battlefield. That is, to use Russian troops in a way that froze Ukrainian forces in place, required Ukraine to divert reinforcements elsewhere to tie Ukraine's hands in the Donbass. And this is it's viable because when you think about the forced disposition, Russia was coming in with 200,000 troops against a standing Ukrainian army of 260,000, were supplemented by another 300, 400,000 reservists with greater potential. Normally, when you attack, you want a 3-to-1 advantage.
Yeah, that would
And
help.
Russia was basically attacking at a 1-to-3 disadvantage. So the notion of shaping the battlefield through the use of operational feint, basically maneuver warfare, to maneuver in a manner which caused the enemy to react to your maneuvers in a way that maximized your combat potential. It makes sense for phase one. But the other thing that makes sense for phase one is that the Russians were looking for the quick victory. I don't believe Russia was seeking to take Kiev. You don't take a city of 3 million with 60,000 troops. But I do believe that Russia wanted Kiev to believe they were making a thrust on Kiev, threaten the Ukrainian capital enough that there could be panic. I think there's some airborne assaults on the airfields around Kiev that didn't pan out the way I think Russia wanted them to. I think the Russians, took a bloody nose on this one. Had the airborne assaults worked, had the airborne assaults worked, who knows what the Ukrainian government would have done? Would they have been compelled to flee Kiev, and then the Russians could have just marched in and declared victory at that point? I also believe that the Russians, the FSB 5th Directorate, which is responsible for what they call the near abroad, which Ukraine, from the Russian perspective, constitutes, was heavily involved in trying to win over Ukrainian generals, colonels, Ukrainian mayors, and district leaders to get everybody not to resist the Russian advance, so that the Russians could move in very quickly and create the impression of inevitability of victory. So,
but has that happened? Has that happened?
Well, it happened in Kherson. Russia was able to take Kherson. It happened in pretty much in Zaporizhia.
Yeah.
The Russians were able to secure through heavy fighting a land bridge between the Crimea and the new bridgehead, Kherson bridgehead, and Donbass. But for instance, in Kharkov, which I fully think the Russians thought Kharkov would fall, it didn't. There was heavy fighting in Kharkov, and the Russians took serious losses. And I think in some of the approaches to Kiev, the Russians, ran into more resistance than they had anticipated. So I think that yes, they succeeded in shaping the battlefield, but they failed in the quick victory. They failed to collapse the Ukrainian government, and this will go down as an intelligence failure. I mean, I think just got to be honest about what happened. And if you're a Russian commander, you have to be honest and say that was a failure. Now, you don't have to be public about it, and the Russians are never public about it.
So you don't think this in any way could have been tactical?
The failures?
Yeah.
No. The number of troops that were killed, the fact that you had columns advancing without any flank protection, and without any rear security, enabling them to be cut off and annihilated by the Ukrainians, suffering, hundreds, if not thousands of dead and wounded and prisoners. There's nothing tactical about that. That's just plain ass get your butt kicked. And the Russians, when you look at the grand scheme of things, the Russians were inflicting casualties at a rate of 3-to-1 or greater on the Ukrainians, sometimes 5-to-1. So the Russians weren't being beaten, but they made mistakes and they suffered casualties. And as a result, I think they made the decision to transition into phase two, which was to regroup and focus on the liberation of the Donbass. And that's what phase two is about. And phase two, frankly speaking, was a great success. Was shaping up to be a great success. The Russians by April, May, had pretty much destroyed the Ukrainian army. All of the equipment that the Ukrainian army possessed prior to February 24th had been destroyed by the Russians. And a large number of the Ukrainian regular forces, the well-trained, well-led, well-equipped forces, were either dead or wounded. And so, left to their own devices, Russia, despite some missteps in phase one, was well on the way to achieving its at least the demilitarization aspect of its objectives. But then NATO changed the game. NATO said we're going to commit tens of billions of dollars in equipment and economic assistance to keep the Ukrainian government afloat and to allow the military to be reconstituted. And we saw that play out. I mean, I called this out in May. I said this is a game-changing event, and everybody needs to understand that Russia, in my opinion, doesn't have the resources allocated to this problem to deal with NATO. These resources were sufficient to deal with the Ukrainian military, but not with NATO. And we saw in earlier this month, when the Ukrainians launched their counteroffensive, we saw that the Russians did not have sufficient forces to take on the Ukrainians in Kharkov without suffering significant casualties. I think one of the key aspects to the battle in Kharkov was that the Russians had made a decision that they weren't going to sacrifice their life to hold on to territory that had no immediate benefit. So they basically withdrew rapidly, but in good order. They lost several hundred men, but through their withdrawal, they destroyed the Ukrainian strategic reserves that had been built up over the summer. That NATO gambit, pouring all that money and all those weapons, that force that the Ukrainians had built up had been dissipated, pounded to death in Kherson, and slaughtered in Kharkov. Yes, they got a great political victory. I mean, the selfies that were being taken in Izium will go down in history, but it doesn't. It's a Pyrrhic victory because I think they literally burned themselves out, and now they're in a situation where, when you have a game-changing event like NATO deciding to intercede, in a de facto manner on the side of Ukraine, Russia needs to respond, and Russia responded not by playing the same game that NATO is playing. Russia changed the entire game. They changed the game from being NATO versus Russia on Ukrainian soil to NATO versus Russia in Mother Russia.
Yeah, now it's going to be Russian soil.
It's going to be Russian soil, and that changes everything. And I think the Russians are also, once this happens, they will be able to change the legal framework, which has been very constraining. Special military operation legal framework that the Russians operate under doesn't allow them to do certain things that they otherwise could do with their military. There's talk now that once Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk formally become Russia, Mother Russia, that the Russians will transition away from the special military operation and into a anti-terrorism operation focused on eliminating the Ukrainian forces that, from the Russian perspective, are on the territory of Donetsk and Zaporizhia and Kherson illegally. And the Russians will, and then you listen to people like, Kadyrov, the Chechen leader. Back in March and April, he was begging Putin. He said, untie our hands, let us fight the way we're supposed to fight. But the special military operation wouldn't allow that. But now Kadyrov has been told the hands are going to be untied, and therefore he's saying you will see a completely different thing. And I agree. The Russians, up until now, have not fought in accordance with their doctrine. And I liken this to a boxer who trains to fight, left foot forward. And you got your left foot forward, you got your stance, and everything you do is built around that. And then at the moment of the match, the trainer makes you fight right foot forward. And now you're totally, your balance is off, everything's off, and you're not functioning. And what's happening now, if the Russians can break out of the special military operation, they're going to go back to left foot forward, and they're going to fight the way they're trained and organized to fight. And the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian military today isn't the military that started this war. They're very demoralized. Their best units have taken horrific losses. You have these senior military commanders saying that they've lost 60, 80% of the forces that they had when they began. And the guys that are replacing them are poorly trained and they lack the motivation. So we're dealing with a Ukrainian military, even though NATO is pumping all this equipment into it. It's a military that lacks the esprit de corps that existed early on. And when the Russians come at them with doctrine, I think it's going to be a rout on the battlefield. But we'll see. I mean, time will tell. Let's put it this way. Russia's doing everything right to shape the game to be in their favor. But eventually Russia has to execute. You can't live off of potential forever. You can't sit there and say, we just haven't done our potential. We tied our hands behind our back. Okay, unencumber yourself and then step up and do it, or else, the world is going to have to adjust to the fact that maybe Russia wasn't up to the task.
I am hearing rumors that this might be a much larger mobilization than we are led to believe. And I don't know how true this is because it's a partial mobilization, right? And they're not like necessarily calling up the older guys yet. It's the young guys, right? And not the students. But I'm hearing from people in Russia that there's a lot more troops headed toward Ukraine than they would have expected for, say, just 300,000 people. That's small of a deployment. They're saying it's going to be a lot larger than that. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
The thing in studying Russia, the Russians are very legalistic. Everything is grounded in law.
That's true.
And so when you mobilize 300,000 people and the orders for 300,000, there's funding attached to that. There's resources attached to that. The idea that you commit to 300,000 publicly, and then have secret orders to mobilize 1 million, but where's that money coming from? Because is it secret money? And I don't think so. I think what's happening here, to be honest, is that in the United States.
Oh, I've lost your audio, Scott.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
There, I hear you now. I just lost you for a little bit.
Okay.
You're back. Sorry.
No problem. In the West, we have very well developed reserve structures where reservists train every month. They get together for drill, and then once a year they get together and they train. And oftentimes they're mobilized for deployments here and there. And so, we have a more effective way of integrating reserve structure into the total force structure.
Right.
The Russians don't. They've been toying with this concept of reserves, since for 20 years now. They have people identified. They're in the databases as reserves, and they do exercise mobilization. But the idea of these forces actually forming into units, training on a regular basis as units, et cetera, that's not the case. And what's happening right now is unprecedented. Russia has never, since the Second World War, done a partial mobilization of this scale. And so there are a lot of things that are going good for the Russians. There's a lot of things that are going bad.
I lost your audio again there. I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah, I'm here. It sounds like a vacuum cleaner's playing in the background sometimes.
I don't have a vacuum cleaner here. It could be the fan on my computer. Okay. I don't know. But it seems like it cuts out from time to time. I don't know why. It's just the internet doing its thing, I guess.
Yeah. But the Russians are finding out that some of the military commissars and commissariats have been faithful to their duty. So when they show up, They're organized to receive them, and everything's going well, and it's going as planned. Others are corrupt, and instead of using the money that was allocated to make sure that all the equipment was new, they have old equipment, old rusty weapons, and that money went in the pockets of somebody. So when the troops show up, it's not as smooth and functioning. But the good news is, because of the high profile of this, the Russians are cleaning house. So anybody who is corrupt is being identified, fired, arrested, whatever. People who aren't doing their jobs are being relieved and replaced by people who will do their jobs. And at the end of the day, I think this mobilization will turn out to be successful. Now, there are...
By successful, what exactly do you mean in terms of like them? I mean, I guess what now is, what would we term the victory at this point? Is it just going to be securing Russia's borders, or are they going to continue occupation?
That's what the 300,000 troops are for. They're not frontline combatants. They're intended solely to secure the borders and provide strategic depth in the new territories that are now going to be called Novorossiya, or whatever name they're going to give to it. And in doing so, all the regular forces who are highly trained, motivated, etc., who have been tasked with doing. Look, the Russians, they have, let's say they have 200,000, because again, the Russians aren't giving us a full order of battle, so we have to speculate.
Right.
Let's say they have 200,000 troops, frontline combat troops. First of all, it's a 1,000-kilometer front.
Yeah, it's huge.
So right off the bat, you say, well, that's 200 guys per kilometer. Okay, maybe we can deal with that. But that's not the case, because some guys have to go and protect, the nuclear power plant. They have to protect the roads. They have to protect the headquarters. Plus, all those 200,000 aren't trigger pullers. For every trigger puller, remember, you have to have clerks. You have to have logisticians. You have to have drivers. You have to have these trucks. When you have an artillery unit that shoots, the grads, that shoot the multiple launch rocket, the rockets. Okay, so they fire off those rockets. Where do they get new rockets? They have to have trucks coming up with those rockets, and those trucks have to be coming, and the trucks come from an ammunition dump, and that ammunition dump has to be guarded. Not only guarded, but because the U.S. is tracking it down, giving the intelligence to the Ukrainians who are striking it, the ammunition dump has to be split up and then moved all the time for survivability. That takes a lot of troops. You have to have air defense, a lot of air defense moving around. You have to have a lot of artillery. So the idea that this is 200,000, hungry young men ready to go to battle on the front line is absurd. I think, once you break it down, you might have 60,000 hungry young men ready to do battle. The rest of them are doing support work. Now that's 60,000 now on 1,000-kilometer frontage. That's 60 guys per kilometer. That's not that many. And so what needs to happen is these 300,000 troops have to come in, and they have to start taking over the guarding of the ammunition dumps, the guarding of the supply lines, all that stuff, and free these troops to come up. And then what happens is, instead of dissipating your force, the First Guards Tank Army can now reconsolidate as the First Guards Tank Army, and it can fight war the way the First Guards Tank Army always prepared to fight war. It's designed to fight NATO. It's designed to fight NATO, but in order to fight NATO, you need all 60 to 80,000 red meat eating young men ready to fight. You can't have them off doing other things. And this is what the reserves, the mobilized troops, are going to allow. They're going to enable Russia to fight the way Russia is designed to fight. And by getting rid of the special military operation constraints and calling it an anti-terrorism operation, they're going to be able to come at you full throttle. And that's not just on the battlefield, but through the depth, the strategic depth. I think you're going to see the Russian Air Force unleashed. There's that movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe. Yeah. And there's the famous scene in the beginning where he says, "Unleash hell." And I think that's going to be the case. I don't have a dog in this fight. It's not. I'm not on Putin's side. I can't say I'm that I'm neutral though, because, as an American, I my relatives fought in the Second World War.
Yep.
It's
We
Nazi
beat
Germany.
those Nazi bastards, and we don't want them coming back.
And I take a look at what's going on in Ukraine, and I can't be neutral because I look at this, and while I understand every side has its propaganda, and there's no doubt that the Russians seek to expand. You don't have to work too hard to find a Nazi in Ukraine.
There's plenty of them there.
It's not like you have to make anything up. They're there. It's an odious ideology. It's an odious government. The Zelensky government has sold out to these ultra nationalists who, when you take a look at the laws that they've been passing, banning the Russian language, banning Russian culture, banning Russian history, banning everything Russian.
And it's an act of terrorism even to have what they consider a pro-Russian viewpoint, which means even if you are former Soyuznik, like you're a member of the Soviet Union, and you miss those days, and a lot of people there do, they miss some things.
Especially the older people.
Yeah. And that's normal, but that's considered info terrorism now in Ukraine.
100%. But if you for a second you just eliminate the term Russian and insert the term Jew, you have in Ukraine is an exact mirror image of Nazi Germany in the 1930s.
Yeah, Russians are the new Jews.
And so why you can't be neutral in this conflict. It doesn't mean you have to be pro-Putin and you have to love Putin, to love Russia, but you have to understand that in this fight,
anti-Nazi.
There's clearly one side that's on the right side of history, and that's Russia right now.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that Russia's perfect. It doesn't mean Russia doesn't make mistakes. It means in this situation, as regards to Ukraine, Russia is on the right side of history. And
now, Scott, regarding the prisoner exchange, I'm hearing a lot of, there's kind of a demoralizing effect that this is having on some of the Russian side. And I'm hearing tell that Russians are going to now have the attitude of take no prisoners, because before they've taken a very civilized approach in terms of taking prisoners and ensuring that they would see justice. But in the Donbass, they would have faced the death penalty because they had a death penalty there. But if this becomes Russian territory, Russia doesn't have a death penalty currently. I mean, I don't know if they can change that because this is such an unprecedented situation, but as you said, they're very legal.
If Donetsk has to decide, do you want to be an independent republic or do you want to be part of Russia?
Yeah.
If you want to be an independent republic that can exact revenge on Azov regiment, then don't become part of Russia. Stay independent, and then you get to do what you want. But if you want to be part of Russia, then you have to comply with Russian law, which means there's no death penalty. But it's not just that. I mean, look, I understand where they're coming from.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody watched the battle for Mariupol. Everybody knows what Azov is. Everybody understands the crimes that have been committed by Azov against the people of Donbass for 8 years. And what the West doesn't give the Russian troops and the Donetsk militia and the Chechens credit for is the absolute civilized manner in which they conduct themselves against some horrific people. Even in the Second World War, American troops, when we took over, when our troops took over concentration camps, sometimes we ended up shooting the SS guards because we were so angry at what we saw. And that was Jews that we didn't know personally. Now imagine yourself to be a member of the Donetsk militia, and you know that inside that Azov battalion are guys who raped your relatives, murdered your relatives, tortured your relatives.
Carved swastikas into their skin.
Right. And then you capture them, and you know this guy. I mean, it's not like you're capturing a stranger. They know who this guy is. They have the video, because like all criminals, the Azov Nazis filmed everything they did on their cameras. So they've got the memory sticks, they've got the cameras, they've got the evidence of the crime.
Yeah, they're proud of it. They brag about that.
But instead of doing what human nature tells you to do, which is to kill them, they obeyed the law of war and they captured them. And they treated them properly. They treated their wounds. They took them to detention. They fed them. They housed them and they prepared them for trial.
In some cases, they were even being kept in the same hospitals where they were keeping Russian injured.
Well, that's what you have to do. I mean, that's what the law of war requires. You have to give the same medical treatment to prisoners as you give to the Russian, to your own
Will
troops.
that change now, do you think?
I don't think so, because I think the Russians are a professional military force. And again, if I were a Russian commander, I'd call the Donetsk people in and say, if you're in the revenge business, put your weapons down, take your uniforms off, get the hell out of here. We're not in the revenge business. We're in the professional soldiering business. Our job is to obey the orders of our commanders and execute the mission in accordance with the rule of law and Russian doctrine. If I catch any of you guys torturing people or shooting prisoners, I'll arrest you and shoot you myself. We don't do that. We're not in the revenge business. And it's absolutely imperative that the Russians maintain control. I understand people are gutted about this. I get it. But let's put it this way. Ask the mom of the soldier who came home how she feels about her son coming home. Ask the wife how she feels about her husband coming home. Mother Russia owes a debt to its soldiers.
Yeah, it does.
And one of the guarantees out there is you will never leave them behind. That when given the opportunity to bring your boys home, you bring them home. And that's what Russia did. And that means that Russia will never get the credit for this. That means that Russia rises above petty revenge. And I don't mean petty as if these Azov people aren't animals and don't deserve everything they have coming for them. But it means that when the opportunity came, they did what was necessary to bring the Russian boys home. And that's where honor is. There's no honor in revenge. There might be satisfaction in revenge, but there's no honor in revenge. There is honor in fulfilling the promise you made to the troops that you will never leave them behind.
But what about just the tribunal, the aspect that they were going to have this big tribunal? And I don't know what's going on now with that. Like if it's been canceled in view of this big prisoner exchange that took place. And I'm also hearing different things. I'm hearing from the Western side that some of the Azov leaders were part of that exchange. But I'm hearing from the Russian side that that's not true, that they did not exchange the actual Azov leaders, but just some of their foot soldiers, some of their militia guys, and of course the foreign mercenaries like Aiden Aslan, however you say his name.
Well, I saw the videos of the 4 senior Azov leaders had been sent to Turkey, and they're going to be held, in Turkey until the conflict is over. I mean, they're not going to be allowed to return to Ukraine.
Are they going to escape the Russian justice, do you think, or will there be any kind of a trial for them?
Well, I don't know if there'll be a trial. If there's a trial, it'll be a trial in absentia because they're not going to be there. You say escape Russian justice. Russia has a long arm, and Russia has a long memory. I'm not predicting anything, but I will tell you that in the United States, we would probably they would probably disappear at some point in time.
Well, Bandera did. He disappeared.
Yeah. So if I were these four senior Azov people, I would not sleep easy.
Oh, hell no.
But remember, by making them part of this, the Ukraine, and people have to remember this: Ukrainians were torturing the Russian prisoners.
Oh, yes,
they were doing horrible things to the Russian prisoners. Many of the Russian prisoners didn't come home because they died. So, fulfilling your duty and responsibility to the Russian prisoners of war to bring them home is the morally correct decision, and it's the proper decision of a nation that operates within the framework of the rule of law. Revenge, who endorses revenge? Azov endorses revenge. So
yes.
The Donetsk people have to look themselves in the mirror and say, do we really want to become that which we can become? Or are we better than that? And it's hard to be better than that when so many bad things have happened to you. But again, they want to become part of Russia. They're going to have to behave as Russians.
I think you probably, I can't even imagine Putin having to make that decision, and it had to have eventually come to him. How many we're going to exchange, whether we're going to go ahead and do this and everything, and he had to have thought, we've got to keep these Russian guys, we've got to bring them home. That had to have been the final decision.
I think so, but again, to be honest, I don't know if Putin. I think I think Putin is a better executive than that. What I mean by that is, I think he knows how to delegate, and I think he knows how to say, "This is your decision." You brief me, but this is your decision. I don't think Putin is this micromanager that sits there and has to be, pushing every little button. I think Putin
kind of
is
the Western view of him, isn't it?
About big stuff, and war exchange is it's a big deal, but at the end of the day, that's something that you can safely delegate to a subordinate and say, you manage the exchange. Just keep me informed on it so I'm not taken by surprise about anything.
Yeah. I just know from talking with some of my contacts in Russia how demoralizing that prisoner exchange was to a lot of them. And I hear talk that they're like, well, we know our guys, they're going to just stop taking prisoners now. So I don't know, like some of the enlisted might just say, okay, fine, I'm going to just start killing these Nazis.
That's where officers have to step up and say, no, I mean, this becomes a leadership challenge. This is where you literally have to pull your guys off the front line them up, and have a come to Jesus talk with them and say, that's not who we are. That's not what we do. And if I catch you doing this, you'll be held fully accountable to the rule of law. Russian soldiers don't shoot prisoners. Russian soldiers don't. Now, it doesn't, just because you don't shoot prisoners, what could probably happen is that they're going to press on to the top.
Oh, I'm losing your audio again.
Yeah, what could happen is they'll just press home the attack much more violently, meaning that there'll be less opportunity for people to survive and surrender. So, but
hang on just a quick second. My cats are getting into a fight here.
Oh, no problem.
Deanie, come on. Leave Lila alone. I'm sorry about this.
No, it's all right.
They're having their own little territory dispute. So we're going to hold on to this one here, out of sight, out of mind. I also had a question. I was wondering if with regards to NATO, if there's anything we should look for, like militarily, that would signal a change in NATO's posture. Like, for example, like if they were to start moving more armored vehicles or something like that, what can we look for that would signal a change that NATO is also changing their posture?
I mean, what people have to understand is that NATO has been pouring in an awful lot of equipment, and that equipment has been destroyed by Russia. There's some left, but this is why Zelensky and the Ukrainians are screaming for more and more and more, because they lost everything. They've wasted it all and taken Kharkiv and going against the wall in Kherson. If they were to up the ante, let that sound go away there.
Yeah.
If,
I don't know
if
what was some kind of interference, probably. I keep losing. It's like you just sort of get muffled for a little bit, and I want to be sure we hear you.
Well, that's the sound I liken to a vacuum cleaner. It comes in and once in a while just drowns everything out. But if NATO were to start sending German main battle tanks or American main battle tanks or American Bradley fighting vehicles or German Marder infantry fighting vehicles, this would be a qualitative jump that indicates that NATO is continuing to press the issue to arm the Ukrainians, to improve the Ukrainians, to enable the Ukrainians to match Russian military capabilities. But here's the deal.
Do you think? Yeah. I'm
but,
so sorry. I don't know why.
Here's the deal. NATO has already stripped its arsenal bare. There's nothing left to give the Ukrainians. They've given it all. Look at the United States.
What is there?
Look at the United States. We just signed a new $12 billion package to Ukraine. But this is to not give stuff out of our arsenal because we've given everything. If anything else we give, we're taking away from what we need to fight a war. So instead, this is $12 billion of new production where we're having American defense industries produce equipment for Ukraine.
And that takes time.
They're not going to get this stuff till the end of 2023, early 2024. And I would bet more money on Ukraine not existing as a nation state at that time than this stuff ever being received by the Ukrainian military.
And will it even still exist? Because I've also heard that Poland is seeking to have some referendums in the western part of Ukraine and asking if people would like to become a part of Poland.
Remember, Poland's
There's actually one city where they've been distributing polling forms.
No, I understand that, but Poland is a member of the European Union and a member of NATO. And Europe's whole thing is that the borders of Europe cannot be changed. So if Poland starts getting in the business of redefining borders, that's the end, because now Germany will try and redefine the Silesian border. The Hungarians will be talking about, we need our chunk of Ukraine. The Romanians want more. The Romanians will look at Hungary and say, we need Transylvania. And next thing you know, Europe falls back into what they used to be, which is just nations drinking each other's blood. So whenever I hear talk about Poland looking at Western Ukraine, I understand, because historically it was Poland before, at the end of World War II, it was turned over. But if I don't see Europe allowing this to happen. So this would have to be a situation where Poland acts unilaterally, knowing that in doing so, they forego Article 5 protection under the NATO Charter, and that they are operating in violation of the European Union's principles. And so I don't see Poland taking that step yet. But once Ukraine starts to fall apart and dismembered, I do see Europe falling on it like a pack of hungry dogs. And Russia will just laugh all the way to the bank, because that's the fate that Zelensky and the Ukrainian government deserve. It's not the fate that the Ukrainian people deserve, but it's the fate that the government deserves. And it's tragic that this nation called Ukraine, which has some historic problems, it's an artificial construct cobbled together in the aftermath of the fall of the Russian Empire, Lenin's nationalist policies, Stalin's land, decisions about post-war Poland, allowing Poland to shift to the west and take German territory, but sacrificing the eastern parts, which would now become Western Ukraine. And then Khrushchev's decision to throw Crimea into the mix. Ukraine was this artificial construct that never really had a national identity, but nonetheless, it was a nation, and it's a shame to see, because of its extremely poor leadership, that this nation may very well cease to exist.
Yeah, it seems like it is. It seems like if it does exist, it'll be a lot smaller.
Well, then that's again, that's something the Ukrainian people need to hash out with their own leadership. This conflict could have ended in April, when Russia was willing to sit down with Zelensky in Istanbul and limit the territorial loss to the Donbass. But Zelensky was ordered by Boris Johnson not to participate, and that's when NATO doubled down with the empowerment of Ukraine, not to defend itself, but to forcefully evict Russia from Donbass and Crimea. That was the game-changing thing, the decision that NATO made. Now the question is that these territories become Russia. Will NATO continue to back an aggressive-minded Ukrainian government, knowing that if Ukraine continues to press the attack, it's now going to be viewed by Russia as an attack on Mother Russia, and anybody who is assisting Ukraine will be complicit in an act of war against Mother Russia. This is why you see
grounds for nuclear retaliation.
Yeah, well, if it gets to that, I mean, I don't think the Russians are going to automatically lob nukes. So I think if NATO sent troops in, or otherwise sent, new tanks, Leopard tanks, M1 tanks, that empowered Ukraine to threaten Russia with the loss of Kherson or the loss of Zaporizhia, then the Russians might be compelled to do something. But again, the Russians have a lot of options short of nuclear weapons. They have general mobilization. They have any number of things that can be done before they start throwing nukes around. But the fact of the matter is, NATO, because of its irresponsible actions, has allowed a scenario to develop where nuclear weapons are on the table. This should never have been allowed to happen.
It's mind-boggling to me, the leadership of NATO. I don't understand why they keep escalating the threat of nuclear war all the time. They keep threatening Russia. They keep poking the bear. And
well, they've been poking the bear since 1992. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the policy of NATO, and we know this because they went back on their verbal guarantees about not 1 inch eastward. The policy of NATO has been to expand for the purpose of containing and subverting Russia. There's every reason to believe that NATO and the United States didn't just want to weaken Russia; they wanted to dismember Russia. They wanted Russia broken up into constituent parts. They wanted the Far East to be independent. They want the different republics in the center, the Udmurt Republic, the Bashkir Republic, Tatar Republic, to become independent. Chechnya to become independent. We know they were actively trying to make Chechnya independent during the 1990s and the 2000s. Putin knows this. Putin knows what the CIA was doing there.
He knows.
So the fact is, the policy of the West has been to crush Russia, to economically exploit Russia's energy for their own benefit, and to politically neuter Russia. And that's what Boris Yeltsin was. He was literally the neutering of Russia in the name of democracy. We here in the United States, we run around, the Russians tried to steal the 2016 election. Well,
oh, come on.
No, they didn't. But I mean, all the things that backed up that allegation, Christopher Steele's dossier turns out to be manufactured. The whole FBI case was manufactured. False affidavits to the FISA court to listen to Carter Page so they can get to Donald Trump. The bottom line is, put that aside. What we do know that is in 1996, the United States did buy an election.
Oh, yes, they did.
Boris Yeltsin's election, and we bragged about it. We put it on the cover of Time magazine, the best democracy money can buy. We didn't even hide it. We said we just flat out bought an election to keep this corrupt individual in power.
They even did a movie about it. It was called Spinning Boris, and it had Jeff Goldblum in it.
There you go.
I couldn't watch the whole thing. It was awful. It was so awful.
But look, if you lived in Russia during the 1990s,
I did.
Oh, so you know how bad it was.
Yes, I do.
And you know then that Vladimir Putin is the antithesis of Boris Yeltsin. He's the exact opposite. He's the man who saved Russia.
He's completely the opposite of
which is why in the West he's reviled. That's what you see in the West. We can't have a Vladimir Putin because Putin is doing that which we never wanted to happen again, which is to restore Russia to its rightful position in the global community, reflective of the geopolitical reality of Russia. That's not what we wanted. We wanted to keep Russia down. Putin's bringing Russia up, and therefore, we had this 20-year march towards what's happening today. War was inevitable. I mean, this is something any student of Russia, and Russia's relations with the West, is that if the West continued to behave in this manner, war was inevitable. You know who said war was inevitable? William Burns. In 2009, he was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, and he wrote a memorandum, "Niet means niet," talking about NATO expansion into Ukraine. And he basically said this is a Russian red line, and if we continue to do this, and here's some of the amazing things, Russia will be compelled to use military force, and here's the kicker, Ukraine will lose Crimea and the Donbass at least. This was written in 2009. So we knew exactly what was going to happen. It took nobody by surprise, and yet we continued to do it under the belief that somehow we knew how to collapse, Vladimir Putin. And you hear today, the West right now, you turn on CNN, everybody's in there. Putin's on his way out. This mobilization
He's been saying that how many
is a sign of weakness. It means the Russian army has been defeated. Putin, fears for his life that the Russian generals are going to turn. I'm like, that's not the Putin I see on TV.
No, and I make a point of really listening to what he has to say, and I don't watch Western coverage of it because they will twist around what he says, they will edit it, they will sometimes even mistranslate it. I've seen that. Like when he referred to Donald Trump as brilliant, the word he used for brilliant was what was it? I can't think of the word right now, but it didn't mean what they made. It was yarky. Yarki was the word that they used, which doesn't really mean brilliant as in like a genius. It means brilliant as in flashy or flamboyant, right?
Yeah.
But they made it sound like Putin and him were bosom buddies, which couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, they know each other, but as statesmen, not as buddies. And they're nothing alike, nothing whatsoever. Now, you have a book coming out. Isn't that true? Let's hear about what your book is.
Well, it's called Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika and the Arms Control and the End of the Soviet Union. It basically is a history of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that was signed between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in December of '87, and the first 3 years of its implementation with a focus on what we call portal monitoring, the inspections at a Soviet missile factory,
right?
Minsk. I played a role in this. I was on the advance party that went to Votkinsk in June to help set this up, and then I was, one of several inspectors that helped build this facility from scratch and implemented the treaty while people were trying. The anti-arms controllers were trying to undermine our work. But this book tells that history from my perspective. It makes use of materials, primary sources that have never been used before.
Excellent.
So it's a unique history. It also, the title is Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. So it also doesn't just talk about the inspections. It talks about what was going on in the Soviet Union.
Oh yeah.
When I arrived,
I was there.
When I arrived in June of '88. While we were focused on building a inspection facility, Mikhail Gorbachev was convening the 19th All-Union Party Conference in Moscow, where he was trying to weaponize perestroika by changing the entire way the Soviet Union was governed, to bring in, a people's Congress of People's Deputies with a new Supreme Soviet that would supplant the Presidium in the Communist Party. The General Secretary would no longer be the premier person. There would be a president, and this was a process. It was a revolution that he was undertaking.
Yeah,
and it was closely linked to the disarmament process. The defense industry of the Soviet Union was a big player. Dmitry Ustinov was the Minister of Defense. He actually had a dacha outside of Votkinsk because of the importance that the missiles had. So he would be flying into Votkinsk all the time to monitor the missile work. So he had a dacha, and we inspectors stayed there for a while. So that was pretty cool to stay in Ustinov's dacha.
That must have been.
But the point is, the INF treaty started a process. Let's look at Votkinsk. They produced a number of missiles, and missiles means money. That's the way, and when you have a factory association that produces the missiles, that means they control the city. They don't just control the factory, they control the city, because everything is derived from that. The social fund, the education fund, all the stores, everything comes from that. So the ability to produce these missiles makes the city viable. But when the INF treaty came, the Votkinsk plant was producing the SS-20 missile, which was banned by the treaty, the SS-12 missile, which was banned by the treaty, the SS-23 missile, which was banned by the treaty. So 3 major missile systems that were still in production were now banned by the treaty. So they lost all of this production capacity.
Wow.
What they had left was an SS-25 that we were inspecting, and then a smaller missile called the Courier, which was a small ICBM under development. And the Courier actually plays an interesting role in the downfall of Mikhail Gorbachev, because Gorbachev was pushing for the START treaty, the follow-on treaty, Strategic Arms
Right.
Reduction Treaty. And part of the START treaty was, the United States had a missile called the small ICBM, or the Midget Man. And so the Soviets
Yes.
their version. Gorbachev wanted to negotiate these away. But from the defense industry standpoint, they're like, if you do that, Vodkins can't survive. We have to keep this missile viable. So Gorbachev kept saying, shut the missile down, and defense industry would go behind his back and keep the missile going.
Oh my.
And so there was this thing going in. And then what made it worse is that the United States, when Reagan left, H.W. Bush became president, and he slow rolled the negotiation process. So what Gorbachev needed was decisive decisions early on so that he could better shape his economic policies.
Right.
But what he got was America slow rolling it. And instead, the Soviet economy collapses into chaos and anarchy.
Yeah.
And in the end, when Gorbachev tried to kill this missile, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. When he signed the final memorandum, or not he, but his subordinates signed the final memorandum in August of 1991, killing the Courier missile, which is what it was called. That incident caused Khrushchev, then the head of the KGB, to call everybody together in a banya and orchestrate the coup. And that's what they were leaning that direction. But this was the straw that broke the camel's back. So Perestroika,
Interesting.
in the time of Perestroika, these are two interwoven stories, and it's told
Very interesting.
not just by my observations, but one of the interesting things about glasnost, the policy of openness, is that the Russian press went from being purely the stenographers of the Communist Party into actually being honest to goodness investigative reporters, putting out the local newspapers, the Leninsky Put, the Vodkinsk Communist Party paper, and then Udmurtskaya Pravda, published in Izhevsk, which is a city down the road. They were publishing fantastic exposés on what's going on inside the Soviet Union, and we inspectors were able to read it. So the story about Perestroika in the hinterlands is told firsthand by the Soviets themselves, and that's captured in the book. It's a unique body of material. So
I am really looking forward to reading this.
And then the last thing about this book is, today we talk about U.S.-Russian relations and how bad they are, and they're very bad. And there's a lot of people who say they've never seen it this bad. Well, then you weren't alive in the 1980s. See, in the 1980s, the United States was involved in a proxy conflict with the Soviet Union. It's called Afghanistan, where CIA was funding the Mujahideen for the sole purpose of killing Russians in Afghanistan. We nearly went to nuclear war twice. And I'm talking about world-ending thermonuclear conflict.
I know, and I'm very grateful to Stanislav Petrov for not allowing us to be bombed that one time.
Yes, so there's that. Able Archer 83 was another incident that scared everybody. In 1985, an Army major was shot dead by a Soviet sentry in East Germany because he was doing his job of monitoring. So when we talk about bad relations in the 1980s, an American president who cut his teeth on the notion of, the evil empire and the need to make America strong again. It was the first MAGA. Ronald Reagan was the first MAGA.
Oh, yes.
We're going to make America great again. We're going to make America strong again. We're building nuclear weapons. We're building this. We're building that. We're confronting the evil empire. And yet in 1987, he signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And because of the work of the inspectors on the ground and Soviet inspectors on the ground in the United States, there was a brief window of time during the last year of the Reagan administration where we became, if not friends, friendly. And we learned about peaceful coexistence and treat each other with respect. And treat each other on the basis of support.
Lost you there.
Yeah, the vacuum came in again. So
yes, there was the detente.
Well, no, this is better than détente. Détente was 1970s. This is completely different. This is mutual cooperation towards a common goal of peaceful coexistence, based upon respect, based upon trust. Trust but verify. That's what we inspectors did, but trust nonetheless. And there was that window of opportunity. There was this it was the Camelot.
Oh, only.
And this book captures Camelot, but then it discusses what happens afterwards, the slide away from it, where the United States, once the Soviet Union went away, a key aspect of Camelot was mutual respect.
Sure.
Trust based upon mutual respect. But once the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States no longer viewed the Russians as their equals.
No.
They treated them as lesser beings and all that. And that destroyed it. Camelot was wiped off. And we've had this gradual decline ever since. So this book, I actually call it a template for peace, meaning for everybody who is sitting there today going, man, I can't see how we're going to get out of this. I say, read the book. And it shows you how we can do it. It shows you the template on how we can go from evil empire to friends and what's required to do it, the hard work that's required to do it. And the interesting thing is, I mean, it's a terrible thing, but Donald Trump withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the treaty that started all this.
I know.
It's gone now. We go, oh, no, and I agree. But it also gives us an opportunity to do it again, but do it right. Meaning that once we start the process of mutual respect and trust and such, that we don't allow either side to slip away from that. That as we build the building blocks towards a better relationship, we maintain that trust, that confidence, mutual respect, because that's the key. And this is what the book does. I think the book is a roadmap to peace. That anybody who is worried about how we can possibly find a diplomatic off-ramp, read this book, and it'll show you that there is a historical precedent.
I really look forward to reading it. My concern, of course, is the type of people running NATO right now, running the U.S. even right now, don't seem the type that are going to be willing to extend this kind of respect to Russia as equals. There seems to be this American exceptionalism is very, very high right now, and I hope
1980s too. Richard Pearl.
Yeah.
I mean,
do you believe this is possible?
I know it's possible. I know there's good people out there, and if they what we need is good leadership.
Yes.
We need a president who is strong but able to be confident enough in the strength of America and his strength to understand that victory doesn't on the strength of an enemy. Victory requires you working with a potential foe and making that foe not your friend, at least somebody that you can peacefully coexist with in mutual respect.
Where do we find this president? I'm looking at Biden and I'm thinking, no,
he's not the guy. But I mean, did we find Reagan, or did Reagan grow into the job?
I don't know.
We didn't find Reagan because Reagan got elected by a completely different understanding. He was elected to bring us out of the Carter malaise. He was elected to make America strong, make America proud, make America great again. And yet he, through the process,
then he busted the unions.
That's a domestic political issue. I mean, I mean, nobody's perfect. Definitely not Ronald Reagan. But I will say this: and when you study Reagan, two things happened. One, he had a literal come to Jesus moment when he was the assassination attempt.
I'm sure.
And he was laying in the hospital bed. And the beautiful thing about him laying in the hospital bed is all the people he surrounded himself with, who were the Richard Pearl types, who were whispering in his ear, evil empire, evil empire, evil empire, evil. They were no longer there. And Reagan had a chance to reflect on things by himself. And then what happened is ABC ran a miniseries called The Day After.
Oh God, I remember that.
About nuclear war. Reagan watched that, and he called somebody in. He said, "Is this what it would really be like?" And they said, "No, boss, that's nothing. It would be much worse than this." And he said, "Oh my God, we can't do this. What kind of leader am I to allow this to happen? We have to find a way." And so that was, Reagan's, come to Jesus moment. Then the other one was 1983. Able Archer was a exercise run under the Reforger, the Return of Forces of Germany exercise. We used to have nearly 300,000 troops in Germany, and then every year we'd practice sending, elements of the 200,000 who were earmarked to fly in within 10 days to reinforce if we ever had to go to war with the Soviet Union. And Able Archer 83 was at the tail end of Reforger, and it was a command post exercise that would test NATO's ability to launch nuclear weapons. And the Soviets were very concerned at the time, thinking that NATO would use the Reforger exercise as a pretense for a preemptive nuclear strike. Since you already have all the forces there ready to go, then you just nuke and then you attack. And so they were on the guard, and they actually thought that Able Archer 83 was the real deal. So the Soviets mobilized their nuclear forces. All those SS-20 missiles that we ended up destroying were brought out and all that stuff. Well, and then afterwards, somebody mentioned this to Reagan. He went, they didn't really think that we would attack them preemptively with nuclear weapons. And the CIA is going, oh no, that's exactly what they thought. And he said,
of course,
this is crazy. And again, those two things got Ronald Reagan to basically have a fundamental shift in his approach. And as a result, when Mikhail Gorbachev came in, he and Gorbachev were Gorbachev wanted to get rid of nuclear weapons, not because he was a big believer in denuclearization like Reagan. Reagan sort of had this religious thing going on. Gorbachev had a practical thing. He needed to reform the Soviet economy, and he needed to do that. He had to reform defense industry, which means they had to stop producing all these missiles. So he needed arms control treaties so he could reduce the missiles being produced, divert those resources into a better economy. But they found common cause. In 1986 in Reykjavik, Iceland, they almost got rid of all nuclear weapons. There was a period of time when they were just with each other going, hey, why don't we just get rid of them all? And Gorbachev's like, great idea, but you have to stop this SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative thing. And Reagan went, I can't back down on that. And then they went back, and Richard Pearl and everybody surrounded Reagan and told him he's insane, he can't do that. And that was the end of Reykjavik. But from Reykjavik came the INF Treaty, and in the beginning of not just controlling nuclear weapons, but eliminating them. That was the beauty of the INF Treaty. We got rid of thousands of nuclear weapons that were threatening Europe with imminent annihilation. And that's what I don't understand why the Europeans are allowing what's going on today, because they're literally recreating the same insanity that existed in the 1970s and 80s, where everyone had to live in fear of a nuclear weapon dropping on their head. If there was an INF treaty, if there was an ABM treaty, an anti-ballistic missile treaty, all these treaties that the United States pulled out of, we wouldn't be worrying about any of this today.
We really do need this Camelot, and so I hope that the people in charge will read your book. I'm certainly planning to. When is it coming out?
Oh, it's out. You can get it.
We can get it right now. Tell us where, so we can be sure to.
Well, the publisher is Clarity Press, so you can go to the Clarity Press webpage, and you'll find it. It's prominently featured. But you can also get it on.
Be sure to add that to my article.
You can get it on at Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and
the title one more time for those that didn't get it, like me.
The title?
Yes.
Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, Arms Control, and the End of the Soviet Union.
Okay. I am really looking forward to this. I'm definitely going to order it. Maybe I can even get you to sign me one.
Be glad to.
All right. Well, it has been a pleasure and very informative to speak with you, and I certainly do appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.